Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we are going to continue with the Seth material. And today we will be reading chapter 9. So here we go. Chapter 9, A Psychologist and Seth Talk About Existence, Another Out of Body. One day, while we were still up on our necks in tests, I saw an Associated Press article that really surprised me. Dr. Eugene Bernard, a psychologist then at North Carolina State University, came out publicly with a statement favoring astral projection. He said that he had propected his consciousness out of his body, interesting word, and that no hallucination was involved. The article also gave details concerning his academic research in the field of parapsychology. I was really excited to think that a psychologist would do his own experimentation with projection, and I wrote him. We corresponded for a while, and then in November of 1966, Gene and his wife visited us. We got along beautifully. He never made me feel that I had to prove anything, which was pretty tricky of him, actually, since he wanted to satisfy himself as to the authenticity of the Seth sessions. We had a fascinating session one night, lasting several hours. Not until it was over did I realize what he'd been up to. Now that's a good psychologist. Gene had questioned Seth in what I guess you would call professional, quote, professional philosophical jargon, making frequent references to esoteric Eastern theories with which I was totally unfamiliar. Gene has his PhD from the University of Leeds, England, in experimental psychology and taught in Cambridge. He also had an excellent knowledge of Eastern philosophy and religion. Yet Seth not only took him on, but in some way I still don't understand. He used Gene's own terminology and jargon to beat him at his own game, and with humor and grace. This session ran 14 typewritten pages and is so of one piece that it's difficult to give excerpts without including a good bit of background information. Here are portions of the last half of the session. Earlier, Seth and Gene had been discussing reality, and Gene had commented that existence was, quote, kind of a lovely colossal joke. Seth answered that, quote, it is no joke. It is a means for the whole to know itself. Now, Seth said the quote joke is highly relevant. If you realized thoroughly that your physical world was an illusion, you would not be experiencing sense data. Can I experience an illusion that I create for myself? You can experience the illusion, but when you experience the illusion as an illusion, you no longer experience it. You are running ahead of yourself. But there's nowhere to go, Gene said. You do not know it. You think it. You will not be where you are. Is there anywhere else to be? No and yes, said Seth. Is there anywhere else to be that is not illusion? I say this to you. Yes. How would I know the difference? Is there any way to distinguish between reality and illusion other than by a creation of my own mind? You do not know it now. When that point is reached, you will be able, if you prefer, to experience any reality illusion at your will. But the self who experiences these realities, illusions, will know itself as reality. There is no place for it to go because it is the only reality and will create its own environment. Boy, that's a mind twister. But that is a discussion of the me here and now. In your terms, Seth said. In yours too. In your terms, Seth repeated. And yours too. Look at the last statement then, carefully. We have come full circle. I am one with what reality I create. There is nowhere to go, Gene said. You must still be able to experience any one of these illusions, knowing they're illusory, with full knowledge of their nature, and still know that the basic reality is yourself. There is no place to go because you are the place and all places in those forms, in those terms. but the quote joke is relevant. The most important thing I have said this evening is that the joke is relevant. You must be free enough to explore the nature and experience of each living thing within your own system, knowing that it is yourself, and then leave your system. These must be direct experiences. But I can't leave the system because I am in all systems simultaneously. I'm speaking in your physical terms, but even in those terms, you're still dealing with other systems. I have no choice. I'm using terms of continuity now simply for explanation. First, there must be a period, and then it has passed when you are completely immersed in a given system as if no other existed. Value fulfillment as a rule being achieved in this manner. This does not mean that you are not dwelling in other systems simultaneously. The illusion must be probed to its depth, of which it has none, Jean put it. You create the depth. Right, and in so doing, the probing has been done. There is nothing to probe. The probing is necessary. Some games are necessary and always relevant. Isn't the object to play the game, not to create or probe? You are yourself the game in those terms, in all other terms also. You are creating your own limitations, said Seth. Is there really more than one viewpoint? Yes, you are not granting the diversity that exists. I would be willing to grant a multiplicity of illusory forms of that same thing, namely you and I, all one. There can be no self-betrayal, said Seth. Right, nor any betrayal of others. But the idea of self-betrayal can lead to distortions. But these distortions are part of the game that Shiva plays. I would prefer to call it a loving endeavor. Of course, Jean said. Think of the classical statue of Shiva standing on the crushed baby. A loving participation in the illusion of tragedy, even in the illusion of self-delusion. You're trying to cut out many steps for yourself. But there aren't any steps. Are there? For you now, there are steps. Aren't they illusory? They are indeed, said Seth. If they are artificial barriers which I create in my own path, surely I can remove them. Theoretically, I kind of lost my place. I'm sorry. Okay, I got it. Theoretically, it is so indeed. Practically, it would behoove you to watch your footing. Yes, that was the comment to Siddhartha. These are tender children we lay to rest. We must mourn them, though they be words lost. We must feel for them, though they be cow dung, Seth replied. We must love them, for they are ourselves. You cannot do less, said Seth. You can hardly do more. To do that is to have open an eye and to see that there is but one short step to take. You are playing a game, Seth admonished. Of course, so are you. We say that Shiva is playing a game. And who is Shiva besides yourself? You are indeed playing a game with yourself, but it is not relevant, and it may be irrelevant. But you had better play it reverently. With reverence for whom? With reverence toward the self. Okay, we're not talking at cross purposes. There is a holy irreverence and a flighty irreverence. You are playing a game. They are both one. And you had better be certain that you know this thoroughly. Dr. Bernard was kind enough to write a letter to the publishers of this present book, giving his opinions and mentioning that session, number 303. More than this, he let me use his real name rather than hiding behind his pseudonym. In his letter, he said, in the session, I chose topics of conversation which were clearly of tolerable interest to Seth and considerable interest to me, and which by that time I had every reason to believe were largely foreign territory to Jane. Also, I chose to pursue these topics at a level of sophistication, which I felt, at least, made it exceedingly improbable that Jane could fool me on. substituting her own knowledge and mental footwork for those of Seth, even if she were doing it unconsciously. The best summary description I can give you of that evening is that it was for me a delightful conversation with a personality or intelligence or what have you, whose wit, intellect, or reservoir of knowledge far exceeded my own. In any sense in which a psychologist of the Western scientific tradition would understand the phrase, I do not believe that Jane Roberts and Seth are the same person or the same personality or different facets of the same personality. Besides the session, Rob and I and the Bernards had a great time discussing out-of-body experiences. Shortly after their visit, my book, How to Develop Your ESP Power, finally appeared in the bookstores. I began to get some mail, though I was hardly deluged. One of these early letters was responsible for my next out-of-body trip during a Seth session. On May 3rd, 1967, Peg and Bill Gallagher dropped in for our regular Monday night session. And as we sat around chatting, I told them about a letter I just received that amused me and sort of outraged me at the same time. It was registered and I had to sign for it, I said. How about that? It's from two brothers out in California someplace, and they want to know what Seth can tell them about themselves. Oops, sorry. I'm going to have a little drink of water here. Are you going to answer it? Asked Peg. I dropped them a short note, thanking them for their interest or something. Seth can do what he wants. I doubt he'll do anything. But as often happens when I try to second guess Seth, I was really wrong. Our session, the 339th, started shortly afterward, and almost immediately I left my body, though I had little sensation of doing so. I just found myself hovering in midair, looking down on a particular neighborhood that was obviously someplace in Southern California. Back in the living room, Seth was describing what I was seeing, but I was only instantly aware of his voice. To me, it sounded far less distinct than a very poor long-distance telephone call. I had no idea how to tell Rob that I was out of my body, as Seth was carrying on as usual. My body, I knew, would be animated as Seth talked. Once I laughed to myself and thought, I'll have to send him a telegram. In the meantime, I floated in the air, quite high, looking down on the location Seth was describing. I was able to move about, changing my position to get a better view, but I had no connection at all with the body that sat in the living room. Seth was saying, now there's a small yard with lemons for the brothers, a pink stucco house, 2 bedrooms to the rear, not a new house. They use the Ouija board in the kitchen. They are near the right corner of the block, but not at the corner. They are not far from water. There is high grass for a while and some wooden posts and wires. In here, because of the specific material, Rob began to wonder if the projection was involved. Are you at the location now? He asked. To some degree, there are sand dunes of a sort. There, I've changed my position. Now I'm facing the house. The directions have changed somewhat due to my position. A garage-like structure to my right now, and behind it other structures leading to the water. Beyond, a dune area and a beach. The tide is in. Now in here, I was changing my position in the air. As far as I can figure out, I was the one at the location, not Seth. What time of day is it? Rob asked. It was after 9 p.m. in Elmira. Early evening. There are fairly thin wooden posts, not round, regular at the top, you see, perhaps hip level. Seth gestured to Rob to show the shape and size of the posts. At the same time, I floated above them, puzzled because I couldn't see what they were being used for. I was also mystified myself by their rectangular tops. Then a bay effect to the left. The land is like this, you see, not straight. The land here curves and juts out again. Here again, Seth gestured broadly to indicate the shape of the sea coast. He also said that the family had a strong foreign connection, though the name was not particularly foreign, and made some other remarks about the family's histories and members. Rob sent a copy of the session to the two brothers. They sent back a tape to which they evaluated the information. Later, they signed a statement which is in our files. Seth's information about their house was right in every particular, including the data on the area and the shape of the seacoast there. The brothers lived in Chula Vista, a place I'd never visited. They lived in a pink stucco house with 2 bedrooms to the rear. The corner was 2 houses to the right. The house itself was half a mile from San Diego Bay. Numerous sand dunes were nearby, and wooden posts, exactly as described, were scattered along the dunes. The family had come from Australia and hoped to return. Several other impressions not mentioned here were also right, others wrong. For example, Seth said that the mother was dead. Actually, she was quite alive, though the family had cut her off emotionally, and she did not always live at the house. Again, this experience suggested all kinds of questions concerning Seth's and my relationship in an out-of-body episode. Presumably, he stays in my body while I was out of it, but this is a simplification, I'm sure. We're still accumulating information on such questions, both through sessions and through work on our own. As always, when things like this check out, I smile all over. I've never been one to accept other people's word about the nature of things, even though at times I've accepted more than I should have. I've always wanted to find out for myself. No one could have been more critical about his own experiences than I have, while still maintaining enough freedom to experiment. So after this episode, I began to relax. I'd been out of my body again, and again things had checked out. How did Seth help me to do this? How could he record my perceptions when my consciousness was across the continent? I was more intellectually intrigued than I can say. One thing I knew, he was pretty tricky, sending me, quote, out without my prior conscious knowledge of what he was planning. I do much better that way because I don't feel that I'm being tested, and I don't have time to fret about results. He's a good psychologist too. This experience and my new confidence obviously made other later developments possible. Other strangers wrote, some urgently wanting help of one kind or another. While Seth insists that help comes from within, he did offer excellent advice to a few, along with correct clairvoyant impressions of their environments, probably to let me know we had the right person more than anything else. Our Monday and Wednesday sessions, where Seth develops the theoretical material, are still private, although a guest may drop in occasionally. Seth sometimes holds a session for my ESP students on class night, and in class he deals with the practical application of the material. Actually, the only person who has attended our private sessions with any regularity was Philip. Seth has given him information concerning his business dealings, correctly predicting the behavior of certain stocks, among other things, and Phil is keeping record of Seth's percentage of, quote, hits. The time ranges for some of the predictions cover several years, but Seth has been correct about a large number of items that Phil has been able to check. Seth doesn't make a habit of giving advice in sessions, though. He insists that people make their own decisions. We really never know what is going to happen in a session. And one night, Seth really surprised us. That night, Phil turned up, unannounced as always. He told us he'd receive a raise. With a comic shrug, he left the amount up in the air. When the session started, Seth promptly named the amount to the dollar, smiling broadly. Then Phil asked Seth if he knew anything about a voice that he'd heard in a local bar. The voice was male, was it not? Seth asked. Yes, Phil said. And you did not recognize it? Then I shall not tell you. I shall not indeed. Was it your voice? It happened so quickly I didn't have time to think, Phil said, grinning. I nodded humorously. During our first break, Seth explained. A month earlier, he'd been speaking to a young woman in a local bar when he heard a clear, loud male voice say, no, no, very emphatically. It seemed to come from within Phil's head. Nothing like this had ever happened to him before, and he was so startled that he muttered a quick excuse to the woman and left the bar. Seth admitted that he was the one who spoke to Phil. After our break, he said, "The woman is grasping in a way that is disastrous to those with whom he comes in contact." He added that the woman, quote, "would have used you as a buffer between herself and another male, and as a bargaining point, exaggerating your slightest interest. An unpleasant situation would have resulted. Because you listened to me, the probable future was changed." Then he gave considerable background information, saying that the woman had a child and was involved with another man. The male involved with her had something to do with mechanics. He also said that she was a Catholic and that her problem concerned a legal paper. After this, Seth proceeded to tell Phil where she lived, though he didn't give specific address. She lives in the third or fourth house in the middle of a dead-end street in the northeastern section of town, but west of the establishment in which you met her. All of this was highly interesting to Phil, who had no idea where the woman lived and knew nothing about her except her name and probable age. Since he was to be in town the next day, Phil went back to the bar and started asking questions. He found out the woman's address from the bartender and drove down the street to discover that Seth knew what he was talking about. She lived in the third house before the end of a dead-end street in the northeastern section of town, but west of the bar. She was a Catholic and had a child and a male friend who was a car salesman rather than a mechanic. Phil hasn't gone back to that bar since. Rob and I didn't know what to make of the affair. It certainly seemed to give some kind of evidence for Seth's independent nature, unless Phil hallucinated the voice and Seth took advantage of the fact and claimed it as his own. If so, and I doubt it, that Seth certainly had information about the woman and the affair that Phil didn't have. Obviously, according to Seth, we can change the future. As he told Phil, at no time are events predestined. With every moment you change and every action changes every other action, I'm able to look from a different perspective, but still see only probabilities. On that particular evening, I saw a probability that was not attractive. You and I changed it. In another episode, a friend claimed to have seen Seth, and under peculiar circumstances. One night, as I lay in bed, I had a spontaneous out-of-body experience in which I seemed to be in a crowded room speaking urgently to Bill McDonald, our artist friend. I shook his shoulder none too gently and instantly snapped back to my body. I hadn't been in bed 10 minutes yet, and I got up immediately, wrote down what happened, and told Rob. Exactly a week later, Bill called us, sounding very nervous. He told me that something strange, very, very strange had happened, and since he was still upset about it, he thought he'd discuss it with me. Instantly, I remembered my own experience and told Bill to wait while Rob got my notes so I could check them as Bill talked. Bill told me that exactly a week before he had been awakened suddenly. Seth stood by his bed, fully three-dimensional, looking just like Rob's painting of him. He shook Bill's shoulder and disappeared. Bill told his mother at breakfast the next morning and wrote a report out for us. The incident upset his mother, who made some joking comment to the effect that he wished Seth and I would stay at home. Only I don't think he was joking. It was Bill's uneasiness that kept him from calling earlier, and I didn't want to call him impromptu. First of all, I thought I had been in a crowded room in my out-of-body experience, but Bill was obviously in his room alone. Another thing, he saw Seth smoking a cigarette. I smoke. Did Bill hallucinate Seth's three-dimensional image? If so, he did this at the same time that I felt I was with him, and he felt Seth shake his shoulder, while in my experience, I shook it. Several people have told me that Seth communicated with them through automatic writing. But Seth denies any such contacts, saying that his communications will be limited to his work with me in order that the integrity of the Seth material be preserved. According to his statements, however, he has, quote, looked in on friends occasionally. One day I met Mrs. Bryan, a former student who dropped out of class due to illness, who told me she had read a newspaper article about this present book that appeared in the local paper. It contained a few excerpts of the Seth material and a reproduction of Rob's painting of Seth. Mrs. Bryan had a terrific headache while reading the article. Suddenly, she thought she felt Seth's presence. An inner voice, presumably Seth's, told her that she had been feeling sorry for herself, that she must stop brooding over her health at once, get up and go out for a walk. If so, she would improve at once. Considerably startled, she did as she was told. In that instant, the headache vanished. By the next day, she felt better than she had in 6 months. She began to take walks again and felt rejuvenated. When she told me the story, I just nodded and smiled. Quite frankly, I didn't know what else to do. We asked Seth about the incident. In this case, he said, Mrs. Bryan had used him as a symbol of her inner self, or supraconsciousness, to deliver help and healing influences as well as advice. The experience helped the woman to see her own abilities, and the idea of Seth enabled her to activate her own healing forces. Seth told me not to concern myself. Apparently, he's delighted to inspire others in such a fashion and serve as a focal point for their own creative energies. He absolutely refuses to let people use him as a crutch. This goes for me too, and maintains that the Seth material itself provides the means by which people can understand themselves better, reevaluate their reality, and change it. Despite the sessions held now and then to help particular persons, and despite their incidence of extrasensory perceptions, the sessions remain focused primarily on the material. It is here we feel that the real significance of the session rests. We are far more interested in the Seth material than in demonstrations of ESP. And we always were. We think it offers excellent explanations as to how ESP or any perception works. And to us, this is far more important. We also accept Seth's statements as meaningful, significant explanations of the nature of reality and mankind's position within it. His theories as to the multidimensional personality are not only intellectually provocative, but emotionally challenging. They offer each individual the opportunity to enlarge his own sense of identity and purpose. Demonstrations of ESP in sessions have always had a purpose, either to help increase my confidence or train my abilities, to illustrate a point made in the material, or to offer information to someone in need. It's easy for me to forget my earlier feelings that Seth should prove himself. Easy for me to forget that I too insisted on my quote wonders, and on several occasions even denied the evidence of my own senses out of the mistaken belief that I was somehow being more scientific that way. Excuse me. I will say that I always highly respected the Seth material and recognized the scope of daring of some of the concepts it contains. Since we had read little psychic literature when the sessions began, everything was new to us. It wasn't until much later that we discovered that some of Seth's concepts had appeared in esoteric manuscripts dating back thousands of years. As our own knowledge increased, however, we found that in some critical areas, Seth's ideas departed from those generally accepted in much spiritualist and metaphysical literature. For one thing, Seth does not agree on the existence of one historical Christ, though he grants the legitimacy of the Christ spirit, as you will see later in this book. While he sees reincarnation as a fact, he places it in an entirely different time context and reconciles the theory with the idea of, quote, simultaneous time. Perhaps more important, he describes reincarnation as only a small part of our entire development. Other equally important existences occur in other non-physical dimensions. All of this is interwound with the idea that personality is composed of action. Seth's description of the 3 creative dilemmas upon which identity rests is thought-provoking and original. His ideas on God are a natural and fascinating extension of these theories. To our knowledge, at least, the inverted time theory and the system of probabilities are entirely original with the Seth material. Seth's idea of the nature of pain is also quite divorced, I believe, from current metaphysical thought. He views suffering as simply an attribute of consciousness and an indication of vitality, considered alarming only by those areas of identity that still fear death as an end. But from now on, I'll let Seth speak for himself. I've chosen excerpts dealing with the subjects at hand. In some cases, Seth gave demonstrations to make his point. In the chapter on health, for example, I've included excerpts from some readings for specific people. I followed the same procedure with the idea on reincarnation. To explain his theories on the nature of physical reality, I'm using excerpts from a session in which he really demonstrated that he knew what he was talking about. If an apparition in the living room can pass as a legitimate approximation. I'd like to close this chapter with excerpts from session 329, recorded in March 1967 for a teacher friend's high school group. Though Seth is speaking to teenagers here, the message is meaningful to each of us. You create your reality according to your beliefs and expectations. Therefore, it behooves you to examine them carefully. If you do not like your world, then examine your own expectations. Every thought in one way or another is constructed by you in physical terms. Your world is formed in faithful replica of your own thoughts. Certain telepathic conditions exist that we call root assumptions, of which each individual is subconsciously aware. Using these, you form a physical environment cohesive enough so that there is general agreement as to objects and their placement of dimension. It is all hallucinatory in one respect, and yet it is your reality, and you must manipulate within it. The world in which your parents lived existed first in thought. It existed once in the stuff of dreams, and they spawned their universe from this, and from this they made their world. If you sell yourself short, you will say, I'm a physical organism, and I live within the boundaries cast upon me by space and time. I am at the mercy of my environment. If you do not sell yourself short, you will say, I am an individual. I form my physical environment. I change and make my world. I am free of space and time. I am a part of all that is. There is no place within me that creativity does not exist. Wow, that is some powerful words. I want to read that again. That kind of hits home. You create your own reality. That's like the gist of Seth's material, right? And also what Abraham Hicks talks about her message as well, right? So let's read this again. This is really, really powerful. I'll start from here. You create your reality according to your beliefs and expectations. Therefore, it behooves you to examine them carefully. Descartes, the French philosopher, did that. He went behind closed doors and he examined every single belief that he had and broke it down. That's interesting. We all should do that. Anyways, if you do not like your world, then examine your own expectations. Every thought in one way or another is constructed by you in physical terms. Your world is formed in faithful replica of your own thoughts. Certain telepathic conditions exist that we call root assumptions, of which each individual is subconsciously aware. Using these, you form a physical environment cohesive enough so that there is general agreement as to objects and their placement and dimension. In esoteric teachings, it's called the elementals. We have the fire elemental, water elemental, air elemental, earth elemental, and in the fifth dimension, the ether elemental. And these are the building blocks of our reality. And that's what Seth is saying here. It is all hallucinatory in one respect, and yet it is your reality, and you must manipulate within it. The world in which your parents lived existed first in thought. It existed once in the stuff of dreams, and they spawned their universe from this, and from this they made their world. If you sell yourself short, you will say, I am a physical organism, and I live within the boundaries cast upon me by space and time. I'm at the mercy of my environment. If you do not sell yourself short, you will say, I am an individual. I form my physical environment. I change and make my world. I am free of space and time. I am a part of all that is. There is no place within me that creativity does not exist. And that is the true I, isn't it? I'm not the body. I'm not the emotion. I'm not the thought. I am the soul. That is our true self. Oh, okay. End of chapter 9. So thank you so much for joining us today. That was an awesome chapter. And we will continue with chapter 10 next week. In the meantime, have a wonderful week, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.